Hello to my online learners and welcome to Chapter 12, the senses. Now we're going to briefly look at just generally what a sense organ is, briefly touch on taste and the types of senses, and then taste and smell. We're going to go into more detail into hearing and into sight, and the eye. So we'll spend more attention on that. So when we look at it, we're going to look at the difference between a receptor and an organ. Then we're going to look at the different types of receptors, look at pain receptors, nociceptors, good word. Then briefly taste, briefly smell. Then we're going to spend more time on the inner ear and sound, and then briefly on body position and equilibrium, a little more detail on the eye, and a little more detail on vision. So let's get started. When you look at, excuse me, when you look at the unit, in the unit, there is in the textbook, there we go. Sense organs are very important for interpreting the environment around us. So it's not only good things like, seeing a sunset and hearing music, but it's also a way to hear of danger, avoid injury, or if we look back to the primitive man, to find food, not be food, and to find a mate. And it is important so that we can maintain our well-being. There are 5 main senses: sight, hearing, taste, smell, and touch. And when we look at that, that all gives us a process of our awareness around us. First off, a receptor, the body has millions of receptors, and a receptor is the specific structure detecting the stimulus. And then the structures go together and with other tissue and muscle, and they will form an organ such as the eyes, ears, or nose. Okay? And most of them have a specialized stimulus that will react. And an example here is, see, the stimulus will detect the sensor. It will then go through a sensory nerve to either to the spinal cord and up, or it can fuse with another cell body and up to the brain. And in the brain, there is a specialized section for sight, sound, touch, and pain. Okay, so let's look at how this works together. When we look at the sensory receptors, we are looking at the type of the stimuli, such as, is it chemical, is it light, is it sound, is it pressure, where is the stimuli located, and how do we increase or change the intensity of it. So as we go through it, we are looking at chemoreceptors, mechanoreceptors, thermoreceptors, nociceptors, photoreceptors, and proprioceptors. And I'm going to go through a bit of them. Pay attention, write down a few details on what causes the reception and a few examples. Okay, let's look at the classification of receptors. The first ones are chemoreceptors. So it is activated by a chemical. So that is odor, taste, and concentration such as glucose or oxygen. So we have chemoreceptors in our pancreas that detect the concentration of oxygen. And if you remember, there's a chemoreceptor in our brain, in the hypothalamus, which detects the carbon dioxide level. So chemo is chemical. That one's kind of obvious. Mechanical, think of if you're doing something mechanical, your stretching, your pressure, your vibration. So a vibration is in your sound, in your ear. Pressure is your pressure receptors in your fingers. And a stretch receptor is in your muscles. So that will help, and notice it's the change in pressure or reception. Same thing with thermoreceptors. Thermoreceptors are a change in temperature. This is an example when if you're in a pool and you go from the pool to the hot tub gets very, very hot, and then eventually your body will adjust to it. And then if you go from the hot tub back to the pool, it will be very cold, where before the pool was warm. So realize it's the change. If you want to do something interesting, put one hand in ice water and one hand in warm water and then put them both in the same water, and you'll see there's a change in temperature. And this is why, yeah, it's a change in temperature. This is why it's relative. Okay, let's look at the other receptors, the NOC receptors. NOC receptors are pain receptors, and they can respond to, usually from tissue damage. Then the last one is photoreceptors, and photoreceptors respond to light. So now let's go and continue with the summary. That's not the one I want. So here is our summary. What did you get? The PowerPoint threw in proprioreceptors, which is a type of mechanical receptor. So the PowerPoint adds another one. Chemo, you're looking at chemicals. Mechano, you're looking at stretch pressure. Thermo, you're looking at change in temperature. Nociceptors. I kind of think that's you're nauseous, you're pain. That's how I kind of relate the two words. The other ones are pretty straightforward. Proprioreceptors and light receptors. Okay. Good. Now, we have general senses that we're going to look at. And the general senses include pain, touch, stretch, and temperature. And these are widely involved all over the skin. If you remember back to the skin, there's all sorts of pressure and pressure touches there, or pressure sensors and pain sensors and temperature sensors in your skin. They're widely distributed, usually in your places that are sensitive, like your lips, your face, your fingers, are more sensitive than places like your back. Good. Nociceptors are free nerve endings that carry the impulses to the brain. The receptors are abundant on the skin and mucus, and they have both fast receptors and slow pain receptors. The fast receptors are usually myelinated, and they're from places where you will activate the pain. And this is sort of related to the nerve or the reflex arc. The pain for withdrawal, the reflex to withdrawal, stays right at the spinal cord, but then information will be sent up through the spinal cord, through the reticular formation. It will be processed in the thalamus and then go to a certain part of the cortex. Let's look at this little receptor. Hopefully the sound will work. We'll see.
When an injury occurs, injured tissues release chemicals that stimulate nociceptors and trigger pain. A neuron conducts a pain signal to the dorsal horn of the spinal cord. At the dorsal horn, the spinothalamic tract relays the pain signal to the thalamus. At the same time, the spinoreticcular tract carries pain signals to the reticular formation of the brainstem. The thalamus relays the signal from the spinothalamic tract to the postcentral gyrus of the cerebrum. At that point, the person becomes aware of the pain.
I just wanted you to be aware of the complexity of the pain pathway. You don't need to know all the details. Just realize that pain is complex. That's why you can have what's called phantom pain, where you feel you have pain even though you don't have pain. Anyway, pain is complex. Pain is complex viscerally because there are less sensory receptors in the visceral system, and this can result in what's called referred pain, which means you may have pain in an area that originates deep from your deep tissue, but it goes to a totally different part. And the example here is if you have a heart attack, you'll feel it up your arm. What I think is really interesting is here you have pain from your gallbladder and your liver in your neck. So there is referred pain because the sensory receptors from one organ will cover more than one area. In your fingers, you sort of have one pain receptor that with one spinal nerve, where in your visceral, you'll have pain receptors. They're more diffuse, so there's fewer of them over a greater area. And then they may travel the same pathway to the brain, so there's misidentification of pain is really how that works. Okay? Now, when we look at temperature, Temperature is just the relative change in temperature. So in your body, you have free nerve endings, and a warm receptor is above 25 degrees Celsius. So that's pretty much 20 degrees Celsius is relatively room temperature, so it's above that. Anything above 48 degrees Celsius is a burning pain. Now, 37 is body temperature, so 48 is even more, so it'll cause pain. Then when it comes to cold receptors are deeper in the epidermis, and they're activated about 10 degrees Celsius, and below 10 degrees Celsius, the firing will decrease, and eventually you'll have freezing because of it. Okay, touch receptors are Touch receptors are free ending. We talked about them in the skin. There's more in your hairless areas, such as your fingertips, your palms, your eyelids, your nipples, and your genitals. And they have different shapes and sizes. Okay? Now, when it comes to taste, I want you to be aware of taste is a chemical sensation. Let me get this centered here. So don't worry about all these terms other than the word papillae is a bump. And you'll realize that the word papillae is just a general word for a bump. On the tongue, there's different areas that taste different things, such as salt, sweet, bitter. Salt, sweet, bitter, and there's one more, acid. But most of the taste buds are found in the grooves around the bumps on the back of your throat, or bumps on the back of your tongue. And because they're in the grooves, this is why sometimes it takes a while for the taste to be tasted. And you need to chew a little, and then you get an aftertaste. That's because the food needs to be diluted and then go down into the taste buds. Now, when you're dealing with the word taste, the word is gastro. So you have gastronomy cells or taste buds, and they are basically just cells in the tongue or in the pits of the tongue, and they have little hair-like projections. The chemicals will be dissolved, they go inside, and they result in a chemical change which will then stimulate the nerve. And then it will change, it will travel via the glossopharyngeal or the vagus, depending on the facial, depending on what area it is. Okay, so taste basically involves taste buds in grooves of your papillary bumps in your tongue, gustatory, and it is a nerve, and taste is chemical. Okay, smell. Smell is also a chemical, and actually smell can be related to taste and taste related to smell. If you've ever had a cold, and if you have a cold, you can't taste food very well. There are open nerve endings in the top of your nose, and then they go to what's called a olfactory bulb. So let's look at it. Again, it's chemical. So the odor has to be dissolved in. The odor molecules will bind to the receptors. Once it binds to the receptors, it will send a nerve impulse, which goes to the olfactory bulb, and then it will go from the olfactory nerve, nerve number 1, cranial nerve number 2, to the frontal lobe. Okay, again, it's chemical. And smell, words associated with smell is olfactory. Okay. Hearing. Hearing is a little trickier. So first off, let's look at the parts of the ear. And you may want to pay very close attention to this diagram because you need to know anything that's on this diagram is game for testing. So when we look at the ear, we have the outer part that collects it. The ear is divided into 3 parts. Outer, which collects the sound, middle, which magnifies the sound, and the inner ear, which sort of interprets the sound. And the inner ear also has these semicircular canals, which is equilibrium. So the ear isn't just hearing. The inner ear is hearing and equilibrium. So when we look at the outer ear, you've got the collection of it. Here, let me just pop to this video that I like, I like a good video. Let's see what kind of sound issues we have today. And
many of us take for granted a very extraordinary organ, our ears. To understand the ear, we need to understand what sound is. The speakers you are listening to right now are vibrating, flexing in and out, causing a wave of pressure through the air. The frequency of these waves, or the speed at which the sound creating surface moves back and forth, affects the pitch of the sound. The level of air pressure in each wave is directly related to how loud the sound is. The outer part of our...
Okay, when we're talking sound, it is a pressure wave. So the ear is actually a mechanical receptor at the beginning because you're looking at pressure. If you change the loudness, you change the amplitude, or the pressure comes with a louder bang. That's why high volumes of sound will cause pain to the ear, because it's causing too much vibration. When you change the pitch or the frequency, you are changing the type of vibration.
Our ear catches these waves. It faces forward and has a specially designed structure of curves, helping us to determine the direction of the sound and also emphasize the frequencies used in human speech. Now that the sound waves are caught, they travel through the ear canal and strike against our eardrum, a thin membrane about 10 millimeters wide. Now that we receive the sound, the middle ear transfers this energy. The smallest bones in your body, the malleus, incus, and stapes, start in motion. The malleus is attached to the eardrum, and as the sound travels along, the force is amplified by leverage until it arrives at the stapes, which acts like a reversed piston, creating waves in the fluid of the inner ear. The most significant increase in pressure is caused by pneumatic amplification.
Okay, this is a little physics, but I want you to realize that the purpose of the middle ear is to magnify the sound, and it's magnified by the different ratio of the surface area of the tympanic membrane and the surface area of the window. And then also, if you look at this angle of the malleus, it also has leverage.
The face of the stapes has a surface area of about 3.2 square millimeters, while the eardrum has a surface area of 55 square millimeters. Using this, along with leverage through the malleus and incus, the final pressure is 22 times greater than when the sound first arrived. Now we come to the most complicated part of the hearing, the cochlea. In reality, it is coiled up, but it is easier to understand straightened out. There are actually 3 chambers inside, but let's take a look at the central part. The stapes is causing pressure waves to travel through the structure. Along the inside wall is about 20 to 30,000 reed-like fibers. As the waves move along, they encounter fibers with the correct resonant frequency and energy is released. These fibers aren't actually what give us the signal that we heard something. There is a special structure next to these fibers containing hair cells. When the fibers resonate, they cause the hair cells to move, which then sends an electrical impulse to the cochlear nerve and onto the brain. Certain pitches of sound will resonate in specific locations, and louder sounds will cause more hair cells to move. Our brain interprets all this raw data, making it possible to enjoy things like music or an engaging conversation. Just to think that all of this is happening in your head right now at full speed. This is just one of the amazing systems found in the human body that go far beyond our humble human understanding.
Okay, that was a good video. It showed the simplicity and, again, the level that you need to know. As the sound comes in, it comes in the external auditory meatus, and this will cause the eardrum or the tympanic membrane to vibrate. And in the process of vibrating, it'll vibrate the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. Notice it spells the word miss, so that's how you can remember the order. then it will go and cause the vibration on the oral window. Now, when we look at the inner ear has two parts. It has the hearing cochlea, and then it's got these semicircular canals. Semicircular canals are for equilibrium, and we will look at those later on. But the cochlea is used for sound. Now, this is why we get the vestibule is part of the inner ear. So that's why you get the vestibule cochlear nerve is cranial nerve number 8. Also, the eustachian tube, also called the tympanic duct, is the tube that will help balance out the pressure in your ears. You may have, if you go up in an airplane or up in the mountains, you can get sort of your ears in pain and then your ear pops. So it's your eustachian tube that equalizes the pressure by going, and the pressure actually goes into your throat. So this is why swallowing and chewing helps equalize the pressure better. Okay, so when we look at the middle ear has the vibration of the tympanic membrane, which will vibrate and magnify the sound based on the leverage of the bones or the ossicles, and then also hit the oral window based on, the oval window based on the different sizes. So there's magnifications due to leverage and magnification due to the size difference. Okay, then you have the auditory or the eustachian tube, which is used for clearing the pressure, but unfortunately it can also spread infection up your throat, especially in children. In children it's more lateral, so this is why you may get infection in your ears. In adults, as your head grows, it grows more down. Now, the inner ear is a little more confusing, but we're not going to go through all the details. So let's look at just the hearing part of the inner ear. We'll look at the semicircular canals later. In the inner ear, if you were to unroll the cochlea, there's fluid in there called perilymph. And then the fluid will be vibrated as the oral window is vibrated. And then it will cause, the fluid will vibrate the membrane will vibrate the hair cells, and the hair cells will then send the messages to the cochlear nerve. Now realize that these hair cells are very sensitive. This is why if you are exposed to high levels of sound, you will wear out hair cells, and you'll often wear them out in certain areas. So this is why certain, especially construction workers or people with high level of sound, will wear out certain levels. Now, unfortunately, with age, this also wears out. So different frequencies no longer are heard because of the frequency of the vibration of the sound at different frequency. And it has to do with the fact that as the cochlea moves, it's a different thickness. And just like the chords on a piano, the thin chord and the thick chord vibrate at different frequencies, the thickness and thinness of the organ of Corte vibrate at different frequencies. Okay, so a lot of terminology, but basically know the overall process. Make sure you know the hair cells, the cochlea, perilymph. Okay. Now, another thing to do with the inner ear, but is not hearing, is equilibrium. So if we look at the inner ear, you've got these semicircular canals, and they're one in every level, and they're used with rotational equilibrium. So you know when you're spinning and you know sort of which way you are. The other one is the vestibule, and the vestibule is used with what's called gravitational balance, or if you do the static balance. Okay, a little more detail later on in the textbook here. I've gone through all this with you. Make sure you know the step-by-step process of hearing. Balance. When you look at balance or equilibrium, there are two areas and two different types of balance with two types of receptors. So in the semicircular canals, there are this thing called an ampulla, and there's a fluid in it. As you spin, the fluid spins, and as you spin, it will bend the capula or the ampulla, and as that bends, it will stimulate the hair cells to send a message. Okay, and this is why often if you're spinning and spinning and then you stop, your fluid is still spinning, so you may still get a message from the capula and the hair cells sending a message that you're spinning, and that's when you get dizzy. Now, the other one is in the sacula and the utricle, and that makes up the vestibule. So inside the vestibule are two sense organs, the utricle and the sacula. And they have a patch of hair cells that lie inside the organs, but they have what are called otoliths, otoliths, which basically means ear stones. And there's this gelatinous matrix with stones on it, and as you bend your head, it will bend the hair cells, which will then send the message to your brain. Okay, so gravity will pull these little stones down, the gravity will bend the hair cells, and the hair cells will then send the message to the fibers to the brain. Okay, so that is static. Equilibrium is up and down, and dynamic is rotating. So static is the semicircular canals, and dynamic is other way around. Dynamic is the semicircular canals because you're moving, and static is the gravitational force pulling your head down. Okay, now we're at 26 minutes already, so I'm going to cut this video here and do another one on vision, because vision's a whole lot of other information. Okay, so we'll continue on part 2.